There we go. Hey! How was your family day? What, too much? I'm Ellie, and you're watching Jewish Music Toronto's Live with the Cantors, the show where I chat one-on-one with Cantors about their lives and careers. This show is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you, who are contributing to the channel on Patreon, plus business sponsors and more. To find out how you can personally help the show and Jewish Music Toronto's other projects, head to patreon.com/Jewish Music Toronto via the link down in the description. Become a patron today. Remember to send us your comments and questions throughout the show using the live chat. Just click the live chat button on the YouTube mobile app or use the chat box to the right if you're watching on a desktop. Now, let me introduce you to this week's guest. My guest this week hails from the Lone Star State. She is a graduate with honors from Florida State University, holding a dual degree in music and religion, and received her ordination through what is now the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music of Hebrew Union College, from which she aptly holds a master's in sacred music. She's performed with the Zamir Choral Foundation, both as a choir member and a soloist, showcasing her talents at venues like Carnegie Hall and Merkin Concert Hall, at the Kaufman Music Center in New York, the Jerusalem Theater in Israel, and more. Since receiving her ordination in 2009, she has served in her role as Cantor at Temple Sinai of Congregation of Toronto. Temple Sinai Congregation of Toronto. Joining me today is Cantor Katie Oringel. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Any corrections to make right off the bat?
No, you're good so far.
I always like to kick off the show by asking my guests about their childhood. As I understand it, and as I kind of noted too earlier, you're originally from Texas, but you moved to Florida a little bit later on. Tell me about your early years in Houston and how long you were there before moving to Florida.
Sure. So I was actually born in Detroit, Michigan, just to keep everyone on their toes. And we moved before the first winter because my dad felt that winter was something to avoid. When you're born in April and there is a snowstorm 3 days before your birthday, I think he was onto something, although here I am now. So we moved on down to Houston, and in Houston I think it was my first introduction to Jewish music, for as much as because the synagogue was a part of my childhood. Since the day that I left preschool, my mom has been the preschool secretary in whatever congregation we have ever belonged to. So instead of doing karate and swimming and dance after school, I got to go and hang out with preschoolers and learn how to help out in a classroom and play with little kids. And that was always a place in the synagogue that I just went.
This was in Houston?
This was in Houston, and also in Florida. Yeah, no,
right.
It really, I grew with the moves. So while Shabbat was something that we went to.
Oh dear.
More as much.
Give me a second here. I'm just going to take a pause here because I am getting some. Or not. Hold on. I think I figured this out. Alright, I just didn't want to interrupt you, but I think I figured out the issue. Boom, figured it out. I was hearing an echo. Sorry, everybody. You probably were not hearing it. I was hearing it. And you're all wondering what the heck is going on, what's Ellie talking about, but yes, we're all good now. Please continue, I'm sorry.
It's all good. So synagogue was a place that hanging out during the week was just a natural and normal part of my growing up. When we moved to Florida, I was encouraged to join the junior choir, and a current, now colleague, was the first person to say to me, hey, you can sing. Why don't you be a part of the junior choir? And from that day on, Jewish music kind of grew as an important part of my life. I think the realization that I wanted to be a cantor and that Jewish music was my heart was at summer camp. So I grew up going to URJ Camp Coleman in Georgia. And there I picked up my first guitar and learned how to lead a community in prayer and how to bring a community to their feet with joy and song. And that was most kids go to camp, we get arts and crafts and we get to play sports, and I liked that stuff, but I really
How old were you
loved
at the time?
services.
How old were you?
I started going when I was 11.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So that's, and wait, you started picking up the guitar at 11 at the same time? You're doing all that stuff at the same time?
I think at 11 I was looking up to what we call song leaders who were leading us in prayer, but by the time 13 rolled around, I definitely had a guitar in my hands and was trying to emulate the people that I was looking up to.
So I want to bring it back a little bit. We've gone pretty far already into even some of the questions I'm going to be asking you a little bit later. I might just throw them right out the window. But I was wondering, what do you remember of the Houston Jewish community or communities from your early years there?
Musically, I remember learning a harmony part to the Hirsch Oseh Shalom. And even today, whenever I hear that, I'm sitting in the chapel again.
When you say Hirsch, you mean Nurit Hirsch?
Yes. Yeah. And I can see little me sitting in the chapel again during tefillah and singing it and feeling so proud that I was singing a harmony. That there was just a huge joy in adding another layer to prayer before I even knew that was the path I would eventually get on.
If I just start, Oh se shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. So you see there, we were talking about impromptu breaking into song before the show. It can happen.
It can. It has.
I'm wondering, have you had a chance to visit your old community since leaving?
Not in Houston. I haven't been back to Houston. In Florida, we were a part of a couple different communities, and I haven't made it back there. Where I've made it back to is Camp Coleman. My cousin's kids have been going there, and the opportunity to pick them up at the end of a summer and walk in those footsteps brings back every memory and everyone. I mean, camp is such an essential part of the Toronto community as well. Anyone who's been to summer camp, when you return, you're a kid again, and you can hear the jokes and hear the music and imagine all of the same people that made that camp experience so special.
Tell me about your move to Florida. You went from living in a major city of a state that's well known for its arid regions, as I imagine at the very least, to a city where the motto is literally "the grass is greener." And it's only about a 20-minute drive to the Florida Everglades, from what I understand, which is a massive wildlife preserve. So what was that transition like?
Like any move, it was a new school, a new community, a new Jewish community. And I think that moment, I want to go back to that moment when my colleague, Cantor and Rabbi Gabby Arad, said to me, you should be a part of the junior choir. I mention her name because she plays a really important role also in getting me to Camp Coleman, which was so essential in my development. I decided at 11, I want to go to camp, I want to go to camp, I want to go to camp. And living in Florida, camps in Georgia, you have to fly to that camp. So I get to the airport, backpack on, ticket in hand, everyone's lining up. And then I decide I don't want to go to camp. And I start crying and run in the other direction.
You said this was at 11 now, or this was even earlier?
I think it was about 11.
Yeah.
And she and another friend, she pushed, and another friend pulled, and I've never been more grateful. Because
so you're not by yourself when you're going off.
No, you're with a group.
Okay. I was actually wondering about that, like how that's working.
Indeed.
I mean, they can. airline stuff. Don't need to talk about it.
Well, that was before the days of having to go through security and
True.
massive questions.
Yeah. You've been a part of the Union for Reform Judaism for quite some time, I would guess most of your life.
Indeed.
How and when, well, we kind of covered this. Your community life, you said, basically started when you were there with your mother.
Absolutely. So my parents were a part of that community. We were a part of that community before even she started working there. And my affiliation with the Union for Reform Judaism, formerly the UAHC, goes back way further, actually.
Oh.
So my grandfather, who currently lives in New Orleans, was the president of the southern region for the what's now the URJ in the 70s. So a number of years, when I first moved here, the URJ biennial was held in Toronto. And the last time that it was held in Toronto, my grandfather was here representing the southern region. So Jewish leadership in my family, and particularly with the URJ, has gone back a number of generations. My grandmother was also the president of the sisterhood. And at Temple Sinai in New Orleans, there's a Temple Sinai.
There's probably a Temple Sinai everywhere. There's a Temple Emmanuel everywhere.
Indeed, it's a good franchise. When I walk down the halls of that synagogue, I see my grandfather's confirmation picture just below my mother's confirmation picture. So my family is incredibly rooted in Reform Judaism.
I was wondering about how you hold Reform Judaism compared to any other any other sect within the faith.
For me, it's not a comparison because it's what I believe. The beauty of being Jewish in this time is that we can experience it and choose for ourselves how we want to be Jewish. And I think that's a beauty of Judaism, that there are so many different ways we can be Jewish and yet still maintain that sense of community and tribalism that I hope and I believe binds us together.
It's interesting in this day and age we're talking about tribalism, but we're also talking about inclusivity. How do you think those two things work together or not necessarily?
Well, I guess it depends if you define your tribe as an open system or a closed system. And certainly at Temple Sinai, this Temple Sinai, the notion of being part of a tribe means you're all are included. And that's something that I celebrate as the kind of Jew that I choose to be. And I think within other movements as well, that's something that we pride ourselves on.
When introducing you, I noted your dual degree in music and religion. Unless I'm mistaken, or I suppose unless someone shows a prodigy level talent, you don't get into a university music program without having some kind of training beforehand. You already mentioned picking up a guitar between the age of 11 or 13, so what kind of training did you have beyond just toying around yourself?
Yeah, I started singing in choirs as a middle schooler, so I was a part of the middle school ensemble. And growing up in Florida, I think part of why lots of kids join the ensemble in middle school is because we often got to sing at Disney World. So on many occasions, I have sung at Disney World. That was not on my CV. I'll have to add it later.
There you go. That is definitely one to add. I wish I had known that
It's funny because I don't even think of it as, a pinnacle, because that was just something we all did.
As a kid.
And through high school many, many times. And to this day, actually, when I was in high school choir and we would go to something called Epcot Disney Candlelight, which is essentially a retelling of the story of Christmas. Okay. Yep, that's right. It was the first time I had ever sung with an 8-part choir, probably about 300 voices and full orchestra.
Wow.
And while what we were singing about meant very little to me, the energy of singing with so many voices in so many parts with such an incredibly large orchestra, to this day is whenever I hear that, my heart melts and I start singing along. The soprano two part.
Do you want to-
I think we're going to save the Christmas carols for the
Yeah.
next episode.
Okay. Save me from that one. Okay. Tell me about your years at FSU. I know that you served as a student cantor during your undergraduate years. How did you balance the 2 degrees and that role? I wanted to say 2 majors, but it's different from a double major, right?
No, it's essentially a double major.
Not with any extra stuff on top of it?
Not really.
Oh, okay.
So I knew what I wanted to do. I'm going to actually take a step back.
All right.
Because my choice to become a cantor happened around 12 or 13. So let's
I was assuming based on
rewind a little
in
bit.
the camp years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So once I got to camp and fell in love with the music, each cabin had the opportunity to lead one of the prayer services during the week. And often campers would write something. Anyone who's been to Jewish camp, often it's, I like llamas, I like Shema, let's all stand and sing the Shema. It's not always the most in-depth, at least at that point, kind of readings. And I decided music was really the way that I expressed myself, not necessarily through writing and speaking. So the song leader gave me the option of leading a song. So I had the opportunity to lead the community in the Shema, in Doug Kotler's version of the Shema, which is called Listen, which has some really beautiful English leading into it. Wasn't sure if you were going to ask to hear a bit. And that moment...
I allow performances pretty much whenever.
That moment, something happened. Something happened for me inside.
I regret not asking one of the questions I was going to ask you. I was
no.
okay, we covered this. There's no reason for me to ask this question. I was going to ask you, was it like a light switch going off, or was it a gradual thing? So it was the light switch.
No, it was a light switch. And why I say it was a light switch, so now let's fast forward. In 2009, right before ordination, I was having a conversation with a brilliant colleague and educator. Her name's Hope Chernak, who at the time when I was a camper was my unit head. And she pulled me aside right before ordination or graduation. I can't remember which one it was. And she said, Katie, I have to tell you, I'll never forget that moment when you sang Doug Kotler's Listen at Coleman. And I was in shock. I was taken aback because that was the moment that I knew I wanted to be a cantor. So I can't explain what happened in that moment.
For you and for other people, it was like...
But something happened. Call it God, call it fate, call it aha, call it oh wow. There was something holy in that moment for me. So I'm 13, I'm 14, I'm writing in my journal, I really think I can do it, I really think I can be a cantor, because that's obviously what most 14-year-olds are writing in their journal. But that was my path, and I knew that, and I got to university, and I needed a music degree to get into cantorial school, so I started a music degree. I didn't love the music degree. It was incredibly black and white, if you will. And when it comes to thinking, I know.
A lot of mathematics?
And mathematics I'm good with. But I really enjoyed the conversations that would happen in the gray of learning about religion and philosophy of religion and learning about other religions and just the discourse that happened in those courses when I was just taking them as requirements. In a liberal arts degree, you have to take a certain number from this category, that category, and I took them in religion because obviously that was my direction. And I decided, well, gosh, I like these courses over here for what they're offering me that I'm not getting from the music degree. Let's just get a double major and call it a day. So I was able to combine those passions.
And the role as a student cantor at the same time?
Okay, so I knew what I wanted to do from 13, 14 years
As you
old.
said.
At a certain point, you kind of go, am I crazy? Like, is this really, can I really know what I want to do with the rest of my life at that early age? So call it a crisis of faith, call it whatever you want to do, college moments of what now, what next. I tried to take a step back from Jewish life and what that might mean. And eventually I got really sad. And my mom said to me, Katie, go to the synagogue and offer to copy things or staple things, or you were always happy when you were at the synagogue. Just go to the synagogue and do that. This was also in the wake of 9/11. So I think a lot of things, you talk about kind of questioning your life in that moment. So it wasn't my first time entering those doors. My first time entering those doors was at a memorial just following 9/11. But I walked in the doors and I said, okay, you need any copying done? Can I staple anything? Because, when mom says, you do. She wasn't wrong. They said, okay, well, sure, you can help with that, but who are you and what are you doing here? What are you studying? So I gave them my background and told them who I am. And they said, Cantor, we don't have one of those. So they sent me into the rabbi's office, who at that time, Rabbi Jack Romberg had just arrived there. And by that Shabbat, I was on the Bima. And I found my first home as I was far from clergy at that point, but it was my first foray into being a leader in a community as a student cantor. And it grounded me and set me. I mean, I was on the path, but it was great.
It seems like it really gave you more of a reassurance as to what you were doing.
Indeed, and that I could offer a synagogue more than stapling and collating.
I'd like to know more about your time at FSU, how the curriculum of the 2 degrees helped toward your goals, notable professors or mentors, and that can include the shul for sure, and the other influences.
So for sure, there were 2 professors that stand out. One was Dr. Martin Kafka, who's still there and turning Jewish learning into just a brilliant exodus into ideas and knowledge and bringing to light my religion in a way I hadn't considered it before, because this was on an academic level. So it was really wonderful to learn with him. And at the same time, in order to get into Hebrew Union College, I needed 3 years of college level Hebrew, which I didn't have. I didn't have any conversational Hebrew before university. So Melanie Annis was my Hebrew teacher there, and they were really important in that learning process. And like I said, Rabbi Jack Romberg really was a mentor and continues to be. He's actually celebrating his retirement this year, and I look forward to celebrating that with them.
After you graduated, was it straight off to Israel to begin your time as a cantorial student, or did you take some time to breathe?
Nope. I was off and running. I'll never forget at my final jury for Florida State, I sang my required Italian art song, French art song. I think I snuck a Hebrew piece in there because while it was good learning to sing in French and German and Italian, I was really only interested in Jewish music. And at Florida State, Jewish music was not on the curriculum. It is a university very much in the Bible Belt, but I was supported by professors that helped me seek out music that would be both challenging and in the realm of Jewish music. And so their comment to me after I finished my final jury was, so what's next? I said, I'm going to cantorial school. I'm off to Jerusalem in the summer. I'm going to be a cantor. They said, that's fantastic, because you are singing Italian with a drawl. Which is something I have found over the years of living many different places. Maybe it's a singer thing, maybe it's a cantor thing, maybe it's just a me thing. I tend to take on the cadence of whatever community I am living in. So
That kind of makes sense.
you'll notice the progress was appropriately used, and on occasion I have learned to insert the grammatically correct A.
So let me ask you then, can you do any of your previous accents just off the cuff?
Oh, I slip into them when I go there. Absolutely. Are we really going down that road?
If you want. No, we can move on.
I think for anyone who is used to me in other places, they'll tell me right now, gosh, you sound like a Canadian. So we'll stick with the Canadian
Not bad.
accent for right now.
I was actually wondering where your experience with the Zamir Choral Foundation fits into your whole timeline.
Yeah. When I returned from Israel, so the first year of cantorial schools in Israel, I was introduced to the Zamir Choral through a friend, colleague, and cantor, Marcy Caden. And I heard this choir sing, and I wanted to be a part of it. I think hearkening back to the days in high school when I was singing in choirs with 8-part harmony, to get to do that in a Jewish context at such a high level was something I dreamed of doing. And they sang at such fabulous venues and just an amazing choir. And to sing under the baton of Mati Lazar, I think, is definitely one of the two strongest influences of any knowledge of being able to conduct.
So this is a perfect segue into what I want to ask next. During their respective episodes here on the show, both your colleague Cantor Osborne and Chazan Jeremy Burko from Beth Rodom had some great stories to share from their experiences with the foundation and its various projects. How was it for you, and what stories do you have to share?
Well, I particularly liked when I went on a mission to Israel with the Zamir Choral Foundation. What year was that? Let's say 10-ish years ago. And to strike up beautiful harmonies on the streets of Tel Aviv, and to fill that holy place with gorgeous music. And we sang in fabulous venues as well, but I think it was kind of the impromptu singing on the street that it just doesn't get better than that. I mean, don't we all dream of living in a world where it's like Glee, that we just suddenly all know the choreography and we all start singing the same song?
Singing in the streets. There you go.
Yeah.
Cantor Osborne. Oh, wait. I just brought up Cantor Osborne, and a bit of a crossover in places outside of Temple Sinai. It also turns out that along with the two other congregations where you served at during your HUC student career, you were a cantorial intern at the Reformed Temple of Suffern, Shir Shalom, in his hometown of Suffern, New York.
Yes.
He confirmed that one could indeed call Suffern small-town America while we chatted. How would you describe the town, and how was your experience there?
Well, to be fair, I was a student cantor, so I would take the train out on a Friday afternoon. I would do services Friday night. I would do services Saturday morning. Maybe a Havdalah program Saturday night, and then religious school Sunday. So I can't say that I know that I spent so much time exploring, but I did spend a lot of time with the members of that community. It was a homestay when I would go there, so I'd stay with different families. And if small town America means you're willing to open up your home to the cantor coming in from Manhattan for the weekend, small town America sounds okay.
You're a bit of a world traveler. At the very least, you were during your time at HUC. Beyond Israel, you visited Russia, Australia, and New Zealand. What drove you to make those visits?
When I was graduating high school, my grandparents took me out of the country for the first time. So I got a passport, and they took me to Paris, a place that they had fallen in love with many, many years earlier, and introduced me to the rest of the world. I traveled a lot as a kid within the States and islands, Canada, but this was the first time I needed a passport. And I made a commitment to myself on the flight back that I would fill that passport before it came due. So, when I was in university, one of the best things that I did was I spent a semester in London taking courses there, which allowed me to art history. Yes, so that was where I got my first and only art history course, which then set things in motion for my master's thesis, which I imagine will be your next question, so I'm not going to ruin it.
We're not there yet.
Oh, we're not there.
It is, yeah, it's in the pipeline.
Fair enough. And while I was living in London, I did a lot of traveling because it's just so easy from there. And then when I was in my first year in Israel, I had the opportunity, and talking about kind of interesting connections to Temple Sinai before I had connections to Temple Sinai, they would ask students to help lead the singing at Shabbat lunch following HUC services for various groups that were in town, and for one called the Butel Seminar, which is a leadership seminar sponsored by Nanny and Austin Butel here at Temple Sinai. So this is many, many years ago. I met a woman from Australia and we started chatting, and the point of the conference is bringing World Union leadership into one place to develop their skills. So having a conversation with her, we started to dream. Wouldn't it be cool? You don't do any, you don't have specific classes in the summer. Summer is when we're in session fully, the kids are in school. What if we created an internship and you could come to Australia? Wouldn't that be the coolest thing in the world? Yeah, that would be. That sounds fantastic. They had rabbinic internships, but never a cantorial one. So fast forward 2 years later, and I get an email saying, "Hey, we've got this great internship in Australia this summer. Think you might want to apply?" Done. That summer in Australia was incredible. You talk about small town America, talk about small town Jewish life, go to Australia. These communities are led by some of the most incredible lay people I've ever encountered, who run their communities with the highest level of respect and quality and love. And I'll never forget, I'm pretty sure it was in Dunedin, New Zealand. I arrived to the community and the first place they brought me was into a closet. And on the back of the door was the list of questions they save up until the next time a clergy person comes through the door.
Man. How long was that list by the time you showed up?
It had some length, and also at that point I was a student. All of the questions were not things I could just easily answer, but to be so organized and to get to be with a community that valued what I as a student had not yet found the confidence in. If before I went to Australia, I've shared this before, it felt like being a cantor was wearing clown shoes, that I didn't quite fit into them and I was rolling around in them. At the end of being in Australia, I actually felt like I fit into my shoes. And that this cantor thing, just, it felt so much more comfortable, and I felt so much more confident getting to be with such incredible communities out there.
Before I ask any further serious questions,
Uh-oh.
I have to know two things. One, by any chance, are you a fan of the Lord of the Rings movies?
I am not.
Okay. Two, did you happen, by any chance, since you were already in New Zealand, to visit the Hobbiton tour?
I did not. So the sad part of when I was in I know. Well, the sad
and
part
it was
of
around, like, it was after the films were made already, right?
So you're
starting
right.
in 2001, I think.
You're right, but the reality of being in New Zealand in July and August is it's their winter.
Their winter, right.
And while really I loved being there, they believed really, really strongly that heat's not necessary, put on another layer. And let me tell you, when you come out of the shower in New Zealand, you cannot get dressed fast enough. I had packed for summer and I really wasn't prepared to explore New Zealand in that season,
Yeah.
but it's on my bucket list to go back when things are a little bit more amenable to my taste in travel and temperatures.
So, you've already mentioned a bit about the small town nature of these communities. I was wondering what the reform movement is like in those places, if there really is much of a movement.
Yeah, the World Union for Progressive Judaism is in most major cities. And I visited with communities in Sydney, Melbourne, you expect those, Auckland, but I also visited in Hobart, Tasmania. In Hobart, Tasmania at the time, they shared a building with their Orthodox neighbors, and they had a lovely relationship that the Orthodox community knew that I was coming, and usually one will get Friday night and one will use it for Saturday morning, but they said, no, you've got a special guest in town, take the building for the weekend.
That's really
It was nice. When I was in Tasmania, they had just come out with the census, and there were something like 67 Jews in Tasmania, and over my Shabbat there, I think I met about 41. So I got to meet more than half of the Jewish community of Tasmania,
that's pretty
which
crazy.
is pretty crazy.
What about Russia? I want to know about your time there.
Yeah, HUC has a really incredible program called the Pesach Project, and I was able to partner up with a rabbinic colleague and an educator colleague, and there were lots of small groups like us that were sent off in different directions in Russia. So we went kind of north and east to Chelyabinsk and, oh, they're going to remember the other name of it. They're saying it now. I can hear them. But again, small town Jewish life, it's interesting. They prepared us that don't be surprised if there's bread on the table. And take the rules and laws of Passover for what they are for communities that were not celebrating Passover for so long. It was a lot of younger people and a lot of very old people. So we met with some real Vatikim of the community that were too old to come down from, living in like a 20-story building, but those were the Jews in the community. So we would, hike up to go see them. And it was lovely with some of the younger people. I've had the opportunity since then to also get to know a little bit of the Jewish community in Warsaw and Poland with some participation with the March of the Living here in Toronto. And it's really interesting to get to know Jews who find out they're Jewish either on a grandparent's deathbed or, just in ways that it's so different from the way that I know myself as a Jew, and to see the communities that they are pouring themselves into to revive a spirit that was so incredibly strong for our people for such a long time, and to create modern formats of Judaism for themselves, and to find other people like them that are also finding out that they're Jewish at this stage of life, at this moment in history.
All right, I'm going to turn things back to the end of your time at Hebrew Union College. This interview actually winds up being rather timely, as the Canadian Jewish News published a detailed piece last week about a work of Marc Chagall. Mm-hmm. And I would love to know about your master's thesis and recital, A Polyphonic Canvas, Jewish Music and the Art of Marc Chagall. In fact, You're probably looking at those two books right now, aren't you?
Oh, I'm looking at about the 40 books right now that are all
Oh
about
wow! I
Marc
didn't even
Chagall.
notice. I did not even notice.
And I'm
that in
looking
the
for one
bookcase
in
there.
particular. Am I allowed to get...
If you want to get up and
No,
and
there's
get a
one
book.
in particular I would love to grab. The Vinegar collection of...
In case you can't hear that, that's the Vinegar collection of, I assume, Marc Chagall.
No, but it's part of the story.
Ah.
So this is one of the collections of Jewish music that Chemio Vinegar put together. So I mentioned that I took an art history course in London, and what was great about that course is every class was held in a different museum.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was during, was it the Jubilee year of the Queen? So all the museums were free. Every class was in a museum. There is no better way to take an art history course than in that format. And I realized that art was something that really spoke to me. And if I rewind, I mentioned that when I was in Paris with my grandparents, that was my first time out of the country. And the most memorable part of that trip, food aside, was that it's fabulous. There are stories there too, but we'll save those for another occasion too. The tour of the Old Opera House in Paris, the mural that Chagall did in the main theater, which actually there was an incredible exhibit that included some of it in Montreal about a year or two ago. I made the trek to Montreal because this exhibit sounded incredible. It was called Marc Chagall and Jewish Music. So, fell in love with this piece of art. It was my first time seeing a Marc Chagall work, just couldn't stop looking up. And somewhere along the way of my first couple of years of cantorial school, as they started to think about what you might like to write your thesis on, you know, I had this kind of, what if I could combine this interest in art and Jewish music, and particularly with Marc Chagall? I always felt like his art sang to me. And, you know, is that just, you know, a great idea, or is there really something to it? And I was able to explore that there really is something to it. And the moment that I knew that my thesis had worth beyond just something fun for someone to explore, an idea, I was chatting actually when I was in Jerusalem with the mission with the Zamir Choral, I think that was when, with Dr. Eliyahu Schleifer in Jerusalem, who was a professor of mine in my first year, incredible teacher, and he pulled out this book and he said, open it up. And I opened it up, and on the very first page of this collection is a plate by Marc Chagall.
I will actually take care of that.
So it's entitled King David, and it was enough proof for me that there was something to this idea that Marc Chagall and Jewish music were a pairing worth exploring. So fast forward, and I got to research the St. Petersburg Theater that he created all of the art for. Was on display in Manhattan at the Jewish Museum when I was writing my thesis. So I got to write that section of my thesis surrounded by the actual art. And I got to explore where are the connections between Yiddish folk music and Yiddish art music and Jewish and Hebrew music. And as it turns out, this was a man who was steeped in Jewish culture, and he would have grown up with the sounds of Yiddish music all around him, and he incorporates that in such a beautiful and nostalgic way into his art with the fiddler, and in different ways that to explore the art and bring song to it was incredibly fun and challenging, but exciting as well.
We will continue our conversation after this. Now it's time to open up things to you, the viewers. If you have a comment or question you want to share or ask Cantor Oringel, send it in now. If you're watching on mobile, you can turn your phone upright, and hit the live chat button to activate the chat. And if you're watching on desktop, you should just be able to head to the right. Or if you're watching in full screen, you'll have to go down the page a little bit. But either way, that'll get you there. And if you're watching on any other platform other than YouTube, you will have to go to the YouTube watch page. Like, just click the little title up above you.
It's almost like you've done this before.
I know, right? While I wait for you to do that, let me tell you about one of this week's sponsors. This week's episode is brought to you by the JMT Collection on Spreadshirt. Head to shop.spreadshirt.ca/Jewish Music Toronto, or click the link down in the description to find JMT branded designs and my own original I Love Jewish Music design. Purchases from the store directly support the channel, and you get something to show your support. You can get your own today at shop.spreadshirt.ca/Jewish Music Toronto. All right, we don't have any questions just yet. Don't worry about that, because I've still got plenty more.
Fire away.
You were brought on to Temple Sinai fresh out of cantorial school, as I understand it. What drew them to you, and what drew you to them?
Well, you've met me now, so...
You have a great speaking voice, I'll tell you that. And a great singing voice.
When it was time to find a job, the only one that I didn't apply for was the one in Manhattan on West 83rd Street, because I felt like I needed a bigger change in my life than 3 blocks. I was prepared when I finished school to make a move and start somewhere fresh, and I really wanted to be a part of a big team. I love what I can learn from my colleagues and what we can create together. And the opportunity came around to be here, and I jumped on it. It was a huge opportunity. The number of staff that we have and the tenure that they had was just something that felt right. And it felt right from the beginning.
By the time you took on the position, you had already traveled and lived abroad, various places. I still like to ask this to Americans who've come up here to live and work. Anyway, how was the transition, and how did you find it living and working up here in Canada?
I'll never forget early on, my very first few days, going grocery shopping for the first time. And I'm standing in front of a row of cereal, and I kind of break down with some ridiculous comment like, "Why are Snap, Crackle, and Pop only speaking French?" To which someone said, turn the box around. Yeah. So there were a couple of things in the very beginning that were jarring, but have become second nature at this point. I also remember when I first got here, the most difficult thing to navigate was the garbage. I moved here during the garbage strike of '09.
Oh, boy.
And first trying to navigate 3 garbage cans, for whatever reason, my upper level degree just was not sufficient. So those were the 2 standout moments of...
You got it now?
I've got it down. My garbage footprint is like this big. It's great.
Tell me about your overall work for the shul. If I understand correctly, you're not only in a Cantor role, you're also a youth director here.
I am. When I first took the job, I had cantorial school in my background, I had camp in my background, and my involvement in youth group over the years, but no formal training with working with youth. But I had a real excitement for the way I got here was through many, many Jewish educators and youth workers encouraging me and giving me opportunities. So I was ready to figure out how to do that. And over time, I had the opportunity to do a certificate with HUC in experiential education and really understanding adolescents and emerging adults, which gave me
That's this right here, isn't
that
it?
one. What started as reasonably good instincts turned it into actual knowledge and grounding in the philosophies of experiential education.
Looking back at your decade or near decade here at Temple Sinai, of which projects or programs are you most proud?
Yeah. A number stand out. So stop me when I go too far. I had the pleasure of working with Ira Schweitzer before he retired from this place after being here for 25 plus years, who really was ahead of his time in taking students on travel experiences. So when he retired, I had the opportunity to take over the travel program. So since then, we've gone through a little bit of a rebrand. It's now a Lech Lecha, which means go forth. It's a reference to the Torah portion. And the thinking behind it is really what it means to go forth into the world as a Jewish person, and how do you see things, and how does your role in that wider world community impact the world, and how does the world kind of tell you how to understand yourself and your story. So developing that program beyond just a high school program. So it begins now in grade 6. So about a week and a half ago, we took our grade 6 students along with a whole host of teenagers who had created their travel program on a staycation in downtown Toronto. And it was an opportunity to start the grade 6 on this path of travel with us, and to start to answer the question, who am I and what's my Toronto Jewish story? To better ground them in the roots of Jewish history here in Toronto, and as well to develop relationships with their peers and to be mentored by these teenagers who have incredible gifts to share and to give. I've had the opportunity to take students to Washington, D.C., to New York City. A number of years ago, I created something called the Southwestern Ontario Experience, which is a really poorly named trip for what it is. It happens that that's the location.
Okay.
However, we have had the opportunity to engage with the First Nations community in some fascinating ways. We go in Paris, Ontario, to the Residential School Museum and tour that property when we were able to tour. We visited more recently. They're attempting to renovate, so you can't go in, but there's an incredible movie about that residential school that I highly recommend if you can find a way to see it. And the interesting conversations that arise from learning about a tragic part of Canadian history, and where are the echoes of some of the tragic pieces of our history as well. And to hear the students draw connections between the Shoah and residential schools is a really interesting connection for them to make, that when you're thinking about memory and when you're thinking about a world that is whole and is created with love and created with respect, that it goes way beyond just our community that has been injured by tragedy, and that your partners in a world that is better are not just your Jewish community, but a broader spectrum of community. So to get to interface with, it's also really interesting with First Nations learning to draw other connections about this idea that we began as a tribe. There was a really interesting workshop that we did on a more recent trip about First Nations and how they make drums and the holiness of a drum. And when they're holding up the material that makes the drum, it's the same material that we make Torahs out of.
Deerskins, isn't it?
It's some kind of hide.
Right.
But I mean, you could see through it. You know, in another location, this could be the start of a new Torah, and it's incredible to understand yourself through understanding others. And that's the goal of that trip, and why I think it's just incredible that for them to experience another culture as a way to understand themselves and to really understand a piece of their history as Canadians that I think when I first got here was just starting to be talked about. And to really dig into the research and understand that piece of history is difficult, but so important. So to do that with our young people is really incredible. And then the most exciting part of our travel program that actually in 3 weeks' time, I have the opportunity to take 29 of our grade 9 through 11 to Israel. So that's the quote culmination. That's the trip of trips, if you will. And one of the ways, and maybe it'll give a little insight as to why being the youth director has been so fulfilling in this community. Our students pay $1,325 to go on a March break trip to Israel. That barely covers the cost of the flight. This community invests so deeply in its young people that no youth doesn't participate because of what they can afford. And to be able to say that to our entire community, forget specific families that need it, but to live that value is one that I am so proud to be a part of this community that really puts youth and their experiences at the forefront.
Let's chat for a minute about interfaith work.
Sure.
Tell me about the Frozen Chosen.
The Frozen Chosen. I should have worn my jacket. It is officially the only sports jacket I have ever and will ever have with my name on it. You know, in high school, I always thought like the jocks that had the, I don't know, baseball coats or football coats, like those were so cool. Well, now I finally have my sports coat. I am a curler, and not just my hair. And it gets better.
You've used that one before, haven't you?
This is not the first time. It gets better. Wait, here I go. So anyone familiar with curling knows that the first person to throw rocks is the lead. Oh, how I love being the lead. Because in my world, being the lead is the best part of a production. So I am the lead of the Frozen Chosen, and I throw my rocks and sweep hard with pride. Had the opportunity a number of years ago to go with the Frozen Chosen to the national men's briar is called the Tim Hortons Briar.
Yeah.
So the name of the Interfaith Clergy Curling Competition of Canada is the Friars Briar. And the year that we went was the year it went from being an ecumenical league to an interfaith league, because they had Christians of all different denominations, stripes, and colors. And it was the first year that they had a Jewish group as part of the experience as well. But wait, there's more. So we didn't do too well, but it's the most Canadian thing that could possibly happen, because when you lose at curling, the winners buy you around. So we drank a lot that week. I'm not going to lie. We got into the bottom draw, the bottom flight of the curlers. There were about 20 teams. So we're playing for the championship of the bottom flight, and we won. We won the Hugh Christmas Award. That's right. The Frozen Chosen Jewish Curlers of Canada won the Hugh Christmas Award. Came in first place of that flight, or as you can also call it, 17th place.
Before coming to Canada, you'd never played the game or heard of the game before?
My hair was the only thing that curled.
Yeah. How did you find getting into it? How long did it take you to really, like, because you call yourself a curler now?
Oh, I'm a curler. I've got the shoes, I've got the jacket, the ensemble is complete. My very first winter here was shocking. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't have living in Manhattan. There's not really time for winter sports when you're a student and trekking back and forth through the snow and the cold. And I think that first winter, it wasn't terribly snowy, but it was incredibly cold. And I had nothing to do but stay inside and stay warm, and I was incredibly bored. So I set myself up for the next winter to pick up some activities. So that winter I learned downhill skiing and took skiing lessons, and I also started curling. And I started curling because my senior rabbi, Michael Dolgan, had been curling with the Interfaith clergy curlers of Greater Toronto for a number of years, as well as Cantor David Rosen, who's now in Westchester, and Rabbi Danny Gottlieb. The Jews had been curling in this league for quite a few years, and I just joined the fun. What's nice is before we curl on Monday mornings, the Jewish clergy gather for breakfast beforehand, and I wouldn't have the relationships with some of the rabbis from around town that I have now because of curling, and more than that as well, the opportunities that have come out of the curling relationships have been really important to things that would never have happened before. We had the Curling for Peace concert where we sang together, brought together choirs from all of our communities for a concert. I've taught at some of my curling colleague churches. Just lots of really interesting things have come out of building relationships through curling with people that otherwise probably wouldn't get to know.
So does the team still compete in Bonspiels?
We recently competed in the Bonspiel, and it was much like the terrible upset that the Saints had. It was stolen from us. I think we came in 9th, which is better than
17th?
Exactly. We used to be bottom of the barrel, and we were proud of it. But we've had some wins along the way at this point. We are certainly not top of the game, but we are completely comfortable with the Jewish tragedy of curling that often happens on the ice.
So we are getting mighty close to wrapping up, but I did want to ask you about the future, especially because of an announcement that you made either earlier this year or late last year. And towards the end of last year, actually, you made your plans public that you will be leaving Temple Sinai, I guess, around
June,
yeah. After a nearly decade serving the congregation, what led you to that decision then?
I have spent 10 incredible years in Toronto. This has become home. I bought my first home. This community has bolstered me and turned me into the professional that I am today. I am nowhere close to the professional I was when I came here. They've given me the tools, the time, and the space to grow, and the opportunity to take what I have learned here and what I have loved here to another community, perhaps in a more senior position, possibly as a cantor only, is something I'm really excited and confident because of people's confidence in me that people have showed me here. I am feeling confident that that change is something that I can do because of the incredible support that I have received here.
And with that, how did your colleagues and congregants take the announcement?
I have received some of the most kind and effusive emails from congregants and coworkers. It's sometimes you never know quite how people feel about you, and the opportunity to read these emails and to receive in person the joy and the support and the appreciation is humbling. And leaving this community is not a decision I came to lightly or quickly, and it is not easy. And I'm very excited for what the future will bring, and this will always be a place that has changed me, and that I hope people will say long time from now that I will have made a mark on as well.
The $1,000,000 question then I have to ask, where do you go from here?
Disney World. Time will tell.
All right. right.
The plan is not yet created.
So before wrapping up the show, I like my guests to share an item of significance to them with my audience. So let me ask you, what have you brought to share with us today?
I have brought Canterbury. Can we,
He's yeah. Let's
he's in the frame.
he or she.
It's a he. I had stitched him initially to be a she, but then when he got put together, for whatever reason, it was clear to me he was a he.
Wait, so you said you stitched it?
I made this bear.
Wow.
Suddenly, the bear got more interesting. So,
It's an already really nice, very well put together stuffed bear, and now it absolutely has.
so every section of this bear represents a different Jewish holiday or Jewish theme or idea, and
You will have to become a Patreon patron to get the real close-ups of this, just so you know.
And while still in the works, I dream of turning Canterbury into Canterbury's Tales, which, in a dream world, would be the stories of this Cantor bear, Barry, as he is, and the experiences that he has with young children in the work that he would do. So, why is this bear special to me? He's special because he took a very long time to make. But as well, needlepoint is a bit of a Lador Vador sort of hobby. My grandmother, who I never had the privilege to meet, but for whom I'm named, my middle name, Jane, was a needlepointer and taught my mother how to needlepoint. And my mom taught me. So when I needlepoint, I feel a really unique connection to a woman that shaped me, but I did not have the opportunity to know.
So, just as a question, because I saw the KJO on that piece you can't see, but it's over there. You did that needlepoint as well, didn't you?
I did that one. The Brito that it was in the shot. I'm not sure if it's in the shot now. Fair enough. My office is full of my needlepoints, and there is one needlepoint in here that my mom did, and I have one needlepoint at home that my grandmother did.
As we wrap things up, but before I thank you out there, I have to give a shout out to 81 Entertainment for their technical assistance in making the show possible. Check them out at 81entertainment.ca. And thanks as well to the team at Temple Sinai for their fantastic coordination efforts. That's all the time we have for Live with the Cantors this week. Cantor Oringel, thank you so much. Thank you so much. For joining me today. Thanks to everyone watching and sharing the show, and to those of you buying JMT merch at spreadshirt.com or .ca/Jewish Music Toronto and using my affiliate links. The show would not be possible without you. Subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Want to support the show yourself? Follow the link in this video's description to patreon.com/Jewish Music Toronto and click the link to become a patron now. Thanks for watching, and bye for now. See you next time.